A crowd pleaser that actually pleases.
It's a gift for every one of you.
All right, take me down. This is absurdly high. It's not what we discussed.
It's the best movie of the year.
Anything you want to add?
I'm good.
Dungeons & Dragons: Honor Among Thieves. Only in theaters March 31st.
Hey everybody, thank you for joining us for another episode of What to Watch. I'm Savannah Jones.
And I'm Rex Ravita. Today we have Daisy Head from Dungeons & Dragons: Honor Among Thieves joining us. So first of all, congrats on the film.
Thank you so much.
And could you tell us a little bit about your character in this movie, just to start off?
Yeah, so Sofina's, she's quite an interesting one. She's a wizard and she's a sorceress. I don't want to give too much away for people who haven't yet seen it. But she's essentially the bad guy of the piece, and she's a villain. But she's a bit of an outcast, and I chose to kind of lean into a bit of a backstory which identified her as an outcast in her life before she became the wizard that she is. And it was just interesting to develop that kind of emotionality to her, to have that as the root of where this dedication and this purpose came from. I didn't want her just to be bad for bad's sake. So it was interesting developing that kind of, emotional standpoint for the rest to kind of expand from.
Yeah, and I feel like, well, in prior interviews with other people, they always say like playing like the bad guy is more fun than playing like a good guy because of the depth that you can add to the role. So that definitely sounds interesting.
It's exactly true. But there's so many aspects to it, and I think you really lean into the multitudes of almost personality traits that we all have. And just being able to really enhance that to the extent is just a lot of fun.
Yes. So we have to ask, have you ever played D&D prior to joining this film?
I actually hadn't, and I confess to still never having played it. I think all the rest of the members of the cast have played it. I haven't, but I was like, that actually works, that Sofina is such an outcast, and that she's the odd one out, as it were. So no, but I did a lot of research about it. So I fully immersed myself in the world once I got the part, and wow, what a world it is.
So out of all the characters, you definitely had some of the most impressive makeup. It is very shocking, to say the least. And what was the process like, getting into all that? We spoke with other people before, and some of their biggest, when we asked them what's the craziest part about the movie or just filming, they're always like, oh, the makeup is just insane. It's so detailed, and it's just a very long process. So how was it in this film?
All of that and more. Like, it was an exceptional process to be a part of, and I found it actually super thrilling and exciting, the fact that I was able to wear such masterpieces, because they really are just that. And the makeup teams, and the costume departments, like, they just harnessed exactly who these characters were. And especially for my character, so I had to wear a bald cap. I fortunately didn't have to shave my head. And just that alone, like, the whole process took about 3 hours. But for me, such a huge part of finding the character is about the skin that character inhabits. So to literally have something on my person that is so far removed from who Daisy is was such a huge percentage of the creation of this character that I feel indebted to the makeup department for creating the visual component to the character, which only further enhanced my portrayal of her internally. And it was just, a magic journey and transformation. I'd walk into the truck looking one way and come out looking and therefore feeling completely different. I was totally in another skin, which was just amazing.
Did you look in the mirror after and like kind of freak yourself out a little bit, or how's that?
No, I think because there were times, I read a lot of literature and sometimes listen to podcasts, but on the days if I was reading, I would just be totally immersed in my book. And like we'd also chat a lot as well. There's such a fun team. But I would occasionally look up and be like, oh, we've advanced. But I think just being a part of the whole creative process in general, I was never shocked. But the finished result and even seeing it in the film, nothing can quite prepare you, I guess, for seeing yourself so differently. But I love it because I don't see me, I see the character, which is a very privileged position to be in.
I think that's a great way to look at it. I wouldn't think of it like that, but when you put it that way, it does make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So what was it like filming this type of movie during quarantine?
It was interesting. It was like a semi-lockdown in Ireland at the time. But as I said, like, I don't know whether I chose to embrace it because I had no other choice, or whether I was like, no, this actually works for my character. It suits her character. She is an outcast from society and she is very isolated. So art meets life, life meets art, kind of works. Yeah. The fact that she ain't so social was, not a bad thing. But, lockdown was interesting, but I feel so privileged to have been able to create this in it, because I feel like it was a really difficult time for so many people, and where, we all felt quite stifled at times, and like we weren't able to express outwardly and create with like-minded individuals. To have had that opportunity to do that at such a challenging time was a really humbling experience. So I'm so grateful that, we have this to show for it.
Yeah, it kind of gives you something to look back on during such a hard time and think fondly on something rather than be like, oh, this was just such a miserable time.
Totally.
I feel like everyone can relate to that in a way, because it was a pretty bad time for everyone, but I feel like there were just little pockets of moments where everyone was like, okay, kind of is nice to be removed from society a little bit and just have some me time collectively.
Absolutely. And I think, part of the reason why I love what I do is the fact that I am able to tell stories and I am able to be a part of creating escapism for people, whatever that escape may be. And I feel like that's such an important part of what it is to be human and exist in the reality that we do, for us to just give ourselves a break and take that moment to escape. And don't get me wrong, like, I'm able to escape while I'm making it. So that's a hugely important part. But to be able to have something at the end of it which allows other people to indulge in and escape into, I think is so important. So I feel hugely privileged to be able to be a part of those escapes for however many people.
So speaking of escapism, it seems like working on a fantasy film specifically would be so much fun, like different than just like an average standard role where you're playing a normal human, for one. But so how does it feel for you personally, just shooting this type of movie versus an average role?
Yeah, I mean, I love fantasy. I think there's so much scope, and I feel like it's so limitless. And I think that is sort of redolent of the human imagination, that they really are limitless. And, our imaginations don't have to be dictated or restricted by who we are, what we do, or how old we are, which is such a beautiful, timeless facet of human existence. So, creating these fantasy films and fantasy genre, I think is a remarkable opportunity to explore, and just the expanse of it is so widely accessible. And I feel like John and Jonathan did such a good job delivering the script that they did, because there's, you have these incredibly expansive landscapes and this heightened fantasy world that all these characters inhabit. But against that, there's a real heart and a sentimentality and a real emotional core to all of the characters and their story, which beautifully juxtaposes this sort of the more heightened reality that of the world that they all inhabit. So I love that possibility to find characters that are accessible, that are relatable, that have their own stories that are so valid, and they're telling their stories, and you know, it shows that you can have great strength and vulnerability, and at its core there is this emotionality to it. And I think that's what I enjoy most, because I can totally identify with that.
That's great, to be honest. So the film actually includes some big names like Chris Pine and Hugh Grant. Do you have any specific memorable moments working with this cast?
I mean, every day was just joy. It felt like I was, you know, going to the playground and hanging out with all the cool kids that were just doing their thing, and they all had their own individual idiosyncrasies, and really, like, they all lent into their characters so well, and there was just such camaraderie both on set in terms of the film and their characters, but also offset. And we just had a lot of fun. There was a lot of laughter during and in between takes. Obviously, my character doesn't laugh very much, if at all, in the film. So it was nice the minute they called cut to be able to actually laugh and sort of shake off Sofina's demeanor, because what an incredibly talented, wonderful group of people to be able to call my castmates. I couldn't have asked for a better bunch, genuinely. And that sounds like such a cliche, but it's so true. And I'm not just paying lip service to it. I think it really is. You know, I said to someone yesterday, I was like, you know, in a group of people, you know, professionals or otherwise, if you can't find the insert rude word, then it's probably you. I really hope it's not me, because everyone was so great. And I'm like, oh, does that mean I'm the bad guy? I hope not. No, yeah, just what a fantastic bunch of people.
So you've kind of touched on this a little bit, the emotionality of your character. And it seems like from what you're saying, there's a bit more depth than you would expect in your character and just the film in general. So with you being like an outcast and everything like that, speaking to your character. So what do you hope audiences take away from this film after watching it?
Do you know what? It's such a diverse group of characters. And I think it really shows, like, it embraces diversity. And in a world where it's so easy to be defined by what you are as opposed to who you are, I think embracing diversity really highlights the importance of accepting people's differences. And, you know, everyone has a past, everyone has a story. And I feel like the greatest strength lies in the ability to have courage, to be open, be honest, be vulnerable, because that can be so incredibly challenging when there is concern about how it will be received by others. And I think that's a really accessible part of this film, and that all of the characters are so unique in their individual ways, and they all have their own vulnerabilities, which, as you will see, come to the fore based on their life experience thus far. And it's so wonderful that they unite for good, basically, for greater good. And it's not despite their challenges that they're able to achieve what they do, but it's in spite of them. And I think that's a really beautiful thing. And I hope people can relate to that. And I hope people find an accessibility to that is, you know, redolent of their own lives. And I think it shows that you can achieve a lot when you unite, as opposed to seeing people's differences and letting it separate.
powerful. Really, that's powerful. I'm like, I'm ready to see the movie now. So just to kind of switch gears, we're gonna throw a few questions out at you, kind of like a speed round, just some fun questions to go ahead and interview out.
Fab.
All right. So, who was the funniest person on set?
I have to say Hugh. I had most of my work with Hugh, so I spent most of my time with him. That said, everyone was hilarious. But yeah, in terms of certainly his character, and also the stuff that we had together, where I was the polar opposite to his comedic role, yeah, definitely found myself laughing a lot in between takes.
Is there a favorite quote from Sofina in this movie that sticks out to you?
Yes, I think it says a lot about her character. There's a line where I said, I would rather be flensed and flayed than spend another hour with Forge Fitzwilliam, which I think says a lot about Sofina. I think that pretty much identifies her and the lengths of torment she is willing to endure for the sake of, achieving her goals.
So if you had to choose another character in the movie to take on, who would it have been?
I think I'd have to say Doric. I like the idea of being able to shapeshift. I think we all shapeshift in our own way anyway as people sometimes. I think we are, we're multitudes and we're multifaceted people. But to be able to physically transform into all these different shapes, and I've always fantasized about the possibility of turning into an animal of any kind and just what it would be like. So yeah, I think I'd have to pick Doric.
So you kind of answered our last one. It was, if you could have any superpower in real life, what would it be? But I'll switch it up and say, what animal would you have switched to as a shapeshifter?
Oh, that's a really good question. And honestly, I think any animal that could fly. I've always loved the idea of bird's eye view and being up high and just seeing the world from a completely different perspective, I think would be incredible.